Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar. During today's installment, you'll be taken through the real-time truth of Formula One fans' digital race experience. We're very lucky to have David Bailey, Senior Research and Analytics Manager from Formula One, Chris Bland, who's Director at Walnut Unlimited, and Luke Biggins, who's SVP of Client Development at RealityMine. And these are the guys who are going to be taking you through this really insightful and multi-award nominated case study. My name is Tom and I look after the marketing at Walnut, but don't worry, you thankfully won't be hearing too much from me other than to outline that this is a really exciting case that we're really proud of. It's one that we've taken to the stage at IAX in Amsterdam, pre-pandemic of course, and one that has been recognized by the Media Research Group Awards in the Best International Research category, and the Quirk's Marketing Research and Insight Excellence Awards for Best Technology Impact. We're nominated in both of those awards and we're really hopeful for some wins. So before I hand over to the team to present, I'll just take you through the usual rules of engagement I'm sure you're all familiar with by now. You are all muted, and if you would like to ask any questions, please do submit them using the questions tool on your screen, and we'll take some time at the end to answer as many as we possibly can. You'll also be sent a recording of the webinar after the event in case you'd like to share with any colleagues or delve back into the insights from the guys. But until then, I'll hand over to our presenters.
Hello guys. I'm David Bailey. I work for Formula One, the Senior Research and Analytics Manager there, focusing on digital mainly. A bit of background to this project before I hand you over to Chris to take you through the first part. So there's two parts to this. Part one will be around the digital, the app tracking exercise to understand how fans use F1 content sites and apps on their devices and their journey over a period of time. And the second part I will take you through will be focused on the, I guess, in-home experience using our live timing app, which I'll explain a bit more about later on, but how that's used in conjunction with the live TV experience. But for now, I'll hand you over to Chris to take you through part one.
Cool, thank you, David. So just to kind of set some of the scene behind this, I think, when we first started kind of looking at this project, I think there was a number of angles that we could have taken, and a lot of the thinking that we had to start with was how do we kind of tackle head on in terms of some of these big questions of how do we really understand how people are using digital around the Formula One race experience. And I think one of the biggest challenges we had, first of all, was, I suppose, the kind of the traditional ways that sometimes we capture some of these questions, we know wasn't necessarily going to get us the granular detail that we needed to help inform the actual strategy here. So one of the things we know from kind of behavioral science and neuroscience is actually memory is one of those things that is kind of, it's not always clear cut. And when we're asking people a lot of detailed questions about what they've done in their digital journeys, a lot of people just can't often remember. And that was often down to the fact that, people are very habitual. We do a lot of unconscious actions. We know the brain is busy enough keeping us alive without trying to remember every website, what order we visited, and then to kind of fill that in a survey afterwards. We also know that actually emotions are really powerful when it comes to driving long-term memory. So if a lot of people have got a really high emotional engagement with the content they're viewing, then they'll probably remember that. But actually, there's going to be moments that actually emotions might not come through as strongly, and we need to understand that as much in the mix as well to understand where, these different channels can be utilized. We also know that humans are also very good at post-rationalizing, and what we say we can kind of look at through different lenses after the event. So it was important when we took this brief actually that we were able to capture a method that allowed us to get kind of real-time behavior without any of the kind of added kind of behavioral bias that sometimes we see. So that's why we ended up kind of recommending a dual methodology here, and that's where we took a kind of passive metering approach, which we'll go into in more detail in the US, and we also did some eye tracking around the race in Germany. Now, the reason we had to split that was primarily due to some of the timing period and the kind of the race weekends that we were able to capture, because obviously over the season we needed to capture kind of the key points throughout the season. So we ended up capturing kind of a couple of the different races, and we had data around that for either side to kind of help build the complete picture. So the two main race weekends we kind of captured detail on was Singapore and Russia. I'm sure you all recognize the icons there of the tracks. And we actually recruited for the passive metering approach 100 fans in the US, and we followed them over a 2-week period, which covered both of those races. And that enabled us to get a really rich picture of actually the granular detail of everything they were searching for on their different devices and all the kind of apps usage and videos that they were watching alongside that. But I will let Luke explain a bit more about the technology.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. Thank you all for joining today. Just going to spend a few minutes talking a little bit about one of the two underlying technologies that David and Chris utilised as part of the research in the States. RealityMine is a technology company. Our core market is measurement and market research, and over the last 8 years we've developed a range of software that we deploy on participants or panelist devices to capture this kind of really rich, granular digital behavior. We do this across Android, iOS, Windows, and Mac. What that means is we can cover from the smartphone right up to the PC and all different devices in between. Our clients are all within the research and audience measurement sector, and some of the principles within the industry we also hold very dear, and that comes down to kind of being very transparent with people about the purpose of the research, things like a very clear value exchange, limiting the data to only what is needed for the objectives of the study, and making sure everyone who is going to be handling any personal data is named. So we are obviously GDPR and CCPA compliant as a result of these principles and practices that we deploy. Turning to the data itself, the data is broad in the sense that we cover all internet interactions that a person would have. So every time they visit a website or utilize an application, we would record exactly when that happened, for how long, and so on. And this is really the building blocks of all the panels and projects that we run for clients. Over the years, we've enriched this data, kind of responding to where we see demand from clients and the direction of the industry have seen over time. We've focused in on search originally, and probably 4 years ago we expanded into capturing more granular video data from YouTube and some SWOT platforms, and that's expanded since then into e-commerce and social platforms too, looking at advertising exposure on these platforms. We also have a number of kind of proofs of concepts for more granular social data. Obviously, behind walled gardens, the demand and the need to know factor is high. So we're working to explore what we can do in these areas. I'll pass back to Chris to talk a little bit more about how the guys have utilized some of the YouTube data in this case, and then I'll come back on and talk about some of the some of how the other data points are utilized by clients too.
Thanks. So one of the key benefits of being able to take all that data and all that, I suppose, raw digital behavior data was the fact that we're able to build a kind of complete picture of the fans and their behavior across devices across a period of time, which on its own, these respondents would just not have been able to answer kind of and given us all that level of detail. So it actually helped us paint quite a rich picture of who the fans are and a profile of them, but also gave us an understanding of the actual journey across a period of time, in this point over the race week. And then we also, where the eye tracking came in, that gave us a real understanding of the actual race event as well, to see actually how multi-screening and kind of device usage was kind of crossing over between watching the live race and all the ancillary digital kind of tools they have available as well. So the technology enables us to get a lot more deeper in terms of understanding what they do, and actually that leads to a kind of wider question of how the kind of commercial implications can be built on. So if we start with the fans, so we did recruit avid Formula One fans, and we know they are committed viewers, and the context here is really important because actually what we see is these are people who have been fans since a young age. So Formula One is part of their sports repertoire. It's a key part. In fact, it forms part of their identity in many cases, that they're passionate fans. We know that actually these fans will watch most races, but more than just watching them, they'll also analyze the data. They're analyzing the driver's stats, they're analyzing the times, they're analyzing practice sessions as well. So they're interested in the stats. You could say that they're almost like kind of market research in some way, because they're absorbing a lot of that data around the event, and they're trying to understand that as part of their race experience. To do that, they're actually using a lot of different screens. So primarily they've got a big TV they'll watch this on, but they're also using their phones, they're using laptops. In fact, we saw some people with some very complex setups where they had 2 or 3 screens, and they were trying to track all that data at once to give them that full experience. And we know actually from this research that actually the Formula One channels are really key. So that's the official channels. So that's the app, that's the website, that's all the information. But actually they're combining that with a lot of other channels. And part of the research we did was able to map out actually where the mix of those channels all came in at different points, which leads us into the race week. So when we were able to kind of essentially capture the 2-week period from midweek before the Singapore Grand Prix and midweek after the Russian Grand Prix, that 2-week period, we actually combined those together because the behavior was really similar in terms of the kind of pre-post each of the race. So actually we merged them together to get an even richer data set here. So the 2 lines here are essentially showing the usage of the different digital channels by hour in each day. So the first day on the Wednesday, you'll see there's some people very early on in the morning actually looking at the official F1 channel. So as the day goes on, you actually start to see unofficial channels come in at certain points, and later on in the day, official channels come back into play as well, but it's generally a mix. And that's a similar profile on Thursday ahead of the race, ahead of the practice. So these grey bars here, they indicate actually the on the track sessions, so the practice sessions, and you start to see different behavior as the race weekend actually kicks off. And this is where usage of both channels starts to increase, and actually towards the end of the day, you've got a very strong usage of official F1 channels coming through as they're trying to get a lot of information ahead of the official start and the official sessions on the Saturday. So it gives us a rich understanding that actually they're using that mix throughout. And then on the actual qualifying periods on Saturday, again, you have a spike as the official channels are used very much around the kind of understanding the positioning and what that means for the main race. But actually, this is also where the unofficial channels come in, because once you've got the official data, we started to see that these unofficial channels, some of the gossip and some of the understanding of the implications started to come in a lot more. And then the actual race session, actually saw a big spike during the race where the official channels were highly used and became very much part of that experience. And then afterwards, we started to see again the unofficial channels start to come in more. And actually these started to change as the days went on afterwards. A part of that was due to some of the activity that had happened in the race and some of the kind of things that happened after the race. So for those of you who are big F1 fans and have a good memory, actually the Russian Grand Prix, actually Ferrari did lock out the front row, and Vettel, and Leclerc gave Vettel the 2 from the start, but then he never gave back the lead once he'd kind of given it to his teammates. So actually there was kind of drama on the field as much as it was off. So actually it was able to kind of take that drama, and we saw that follow through in some of these unofficial channels afterwards as well. So the other way to look at that as well is the kind of the role of some of these channels. And we know that post-race on that Sunday, the official F1 channel was the core digital channel that they were using, but unofficial came in very strongly there. And the passive data allowed us to really understand that mix of those unofficial news and info sites that we're using. And then there was also unofficial entertainment and unofficial F1 gaming. So we're able to see outside of just the traditional world of kind of the facts and figures and the kind of race news, actually it started to expand itself into other elements around entertainment, such as on YouTube or gaming with esports as well. And that changed as the time went on. So actually by Monday, official F1 channels are still part of that, but the unofficial sources became much more kind of used and a much more rich understanding of that overall picture. And then entertainment started increasing in terms of how that helped them relive some of that excitement from the race and keep that experience going. And then actually by the Tuesday, it became mainly the kind of unofficial sources that they were kind of defaulting to, and that's where they were kind of building up that picture of what happens next. Where do they take that information into the next stages of the next race? So from this insight that we gathered, actually we're able to build a much deeper picture of like individual profiles of some of the different fans. So we could follow individual journeys, and here's just an example of one young male after the Singapore race where actually they started in many different places. So having taken in all the official kind of news sources and all the stats, they then went straight onto Reddit and they started kind of having a lot of discussions about the race results. And actually those discussions would take a lot of different kind of elements, because actually on Reddit, there's a lot of kind of forums, some of which were talking about there's a thing called the Destructors Championship, where they talk about actually how much damage has been done to some of the cars of the various scrapes and crashes in terms of totaling up with that, to see how kind of that's almost kind of gamified in itself as another way to engage in the results. Because it's not always about the kind of the number one driver who's winning at the day. Actually, they try and find the excitement in the other aspects around the other teams and the other kind of almost gamified ways of kind of engaging with the sport. We also know that they went onto YouTube, and actually that followed through. They started watching esports videos and actually started watching individual players and almost reliving some of that magic. And then they also actually still went to the F1 to watch some of the highlights and the innovation side of things and some of the kind of side content around that. So they were still, again, reliving some of that race they just watched to kind of keep that experience going. So there is a video here, but you probably won't be able to hear the sound, but this is actually an example of the type of user-generated content some of these fans were then going on to produce and share, or actually were going on to watch. So this is actually a kind of a video game, but they've also overlaid the F1 theme music on that as well. So they've kind of taken F1 assets and taken that into this different world in YouTube as well. So I'm just going to hand back to David now to take you through the other element of the in-race experience.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I think one of the things that's most interesting for me from what you went through and why it was so important to do that part was we have lots of data in-house. We have Google Analytics, we have research data, exit surveys, you kind of name it. But what was key there, what was the kind of unknown unknowns, was how behavior off our platforms, off our digital estate occurred. For example, we went through Reddit, YouTube, and the rest. I mean, that's been incredibly powerful to understand how they kind of connect to where we sit in that kind of ecosystem of F1 content. So what I'm going to take you through, so if you've learned all about how we've kind of tracked the F1 digital journey, I'm going to talk mainly about this, the eye tracking side of it, where we want to understand how the F1 live timing app was used in conjunction with live TV, the live race, and qualifying. For those who are not aware, the live timing app is basically an app that's installed into a desktop, tablet, or app. And there is a free version, but there's also a paid subscription version as well. Essentially provides live data that's meant to complement what's happening on track. So, for example, the gap between drivers, where drivers are on the track. There's a nice kind of tracker that plots the drivers going around the track. The tyres the driver's using. So for the real avid fans, which is who we spoke to, it's really powerful and immerses them even more into the action which is happening. So for us, and it's similar to the previous bit that Chris took you through, we just didn't have that information. We know how the app's being used through Google Analytics. We can see, you know, by the minute what's being clicked on, that kind of stuff. But knowing how it's used and what's being looked at in conjunction with the TV screen, and that dual screen experience provided some really powerful insights in doing it the way we did with the in-home interviews and using the glasses that participants were wearing. So I'll take you through some of the main insights, if I can. So first off, form factor had a huge impact. You see there the different screens. You've got PC, laptop, heavier live timing usage. The average fan, you can see this example here, someone sitting in their office chair watching the live race on the screen on the left, and the screen on the right. I've got two windows open. One is actually a map, the track, and showing where the drivers are on the track, and there's another window open showing the actual lap times and the interval times as well between different drivers. That was heavy. So that's, I guess, an always-on experience. They've always got that data, kind of like what we have in F1, which is called a pit wall, which teams use lots of screens all at the same time to see what's happening as it happens. The tablet view and smartphone, lighter live timing usage. The smartphone is an example where the phone would be put down but picked up at certain moments when big action points were happening, and they wanted to kind of check in on the app. And they're using it as well to try and themselves, I guess, from the qualitative feedback to kind of predict and forecast what's happening, and to play the part of, I guess, the strategist that all teams have to try and see what's happening, and just to assume, if a safety car, for example, comes out, what might be the possibilities that could happen and how might that impact. There's certain points during a race that have that there can be big changes in the kind of positions that the drivers are in. So if I move on to the next one. This is just a short clip just to show you the kind of imagery that we were getting back from the field work, and using the eye tracking software, we could actually pinpoint where they were looking at the screen. There it's looking at the positions. There's the track I showed you, and then back onto the screen. And there's lots of work that went into that, and mapping and join the dots. I can tell you from the Walnut side, it's really quite impressive to see how that was all pieced together to provide these kind of overriding insights, which have been incredibly helpful. And one interesting, another interesting insight from this was the difference between qualifying and the main race. There's a more nuanced experience qualifying, and we saw greater interaction there, in part because of the way it's kind of set up. Main races potentially hasn't got the kind of stopping points that qualifying has in terms of Q1, Q2, and qualifying 3, and the way it's laid out. And it meant that heavier lifetime usage for qualifying, particularly in between, as fans were trying to see the times that a driver had done, or the tyres they were using, how that might impact the next round, I guess it's. And it meant that we saw lighter lifetime usage for the main race in comparison, just in terms of how often they were looking at the live timing screens to get insights and feed their thirst for knowledge. And between the two, and this could apply to other sports experiences as well, perhaps. Where you've got an app that provides data alongside the actual live action. We found that both in conjunction with the actual eye tracking and the interviews we had, that live timing offers a cerebral experience to enhance the actual emotional side of things which happening in the race. And it meant that the way people were thinking about stuff, and when they were talking about what they were doing and why they were doing it, there was definitely a lot of thought that went into it. And they're really thinking about why they moved to that tire, what could that mean, and it just meant a different side of the brain, I guess, was being used. And that race experience, they need to be watching that to be able to kind of jump off their seat, to shout at the screen if something was happening that angered them, and both those sides really just essentially immerse fans into the kind of sport experience even more so than one versus the other. And yes, TV has data, and we're trying to add more through our AWS insights. But we just found that, particularly for the avid fan who's really knowledgeable about the sport, that twinning those together provided both that emotional experience and cerebral experience that made them just think about that a little bit more, about what was happening, and immersed in that a little bit more. Okay. So what now for F1? What we've done with this? Well, one of the first things which I'll kind of touch on briefly is just that F1 channels they play a part for the fan. I think going into this, I had ideas about, are there areas we could be doing more of? For example, on the websites today, we don't have a comment section. A lot of the kind of conversation happens outside of our apps and F1.com, and it happens in places like Reddit, in places like Twitter, social media. And should we be doing more of that? Should we have a comment section article? Should we be facilitating more chat? What else can we kind of do? And we kind of felt like that, these communities that are hugely important, such as Reddit, and we kind of mentioned the stuff that's happening in there, and it's really, really organic, and it's potentially quite hard to kind of replicate, and why necessarily do you need to? And in terms of point 2, which was about lean back content, to engage fans between races. So lean back is just generally a bit more lighthearted. If lean forward might be more about stats and the technical side of things. The example that Chris showed was the video, which was virtual reality, someone using a couple of controllers to beat match in time to the theme tune. And there's plenty more stuff. There's plenty of the stuff we've done since that have been a bit more lighthearted, and particularly trying to kind of poke fun and animations and that kind of stuff, and hopefully we'll do more of that. But we definitely found that fans, particularly avid fans, were engaged with that kind of stuff on outside of the F1, our kind of F1 digital estate. And then point 3, regarding the live timing experience, just over and above we got for this, and this probably occurs across multiple sports and platforms, just about personalization. I'm sure many years it's been the marketing buzzword, and it could be this year for all I know. But personalization, really, really important, something we're moving towards as a business, even more so. I think ideally the fan wants personalization that gives them, widgets and a setup that gives them exactly what they want. So it might be a view that's tailored to their team or their driver, and just very distinctive to what they want, because the experience differs for each fan. But in general, kind of, if I want to summarize what we've kind of taken you through today, I think I focus on where it's benefited us is being off of our estate. You can have all the data you want, analytics, but you can't, find out, when people visit sites like, Sky Sports or BBC Sport, and how that complements or differs to what they're doing on F1. But it's meant we kind of understand what's being offered elsewhere, and do we need to replicate it, or do we just leave as is and just assume that there's always going to be a case for fans to visit sites outside of what we offer? Yes, that's the main the summary. I'll pass on to Tom, I think, and see if we've got any questions.
Well, actually, just before we do, I think just a kind of a quick note to say where I think, given that we've used this technology a lot, there's a few different ways we can kind of, help to understand a lot of the different kind of customer journeys at different points. So there are a few examples we have.
Yeah, I'll just touch on a few of these. Yeah, I guess the themes that David mentioned are things that we, kind of resonate across, many different categories, many different types of clients. That challenge of having different data sets in-house, and not necessarily having a way to stitch them all together. You know, the technology that we used in this example gave a way to look at from an individual, from a known individual who we know a lot of other information about in terms of demographics and profile, and have the ability to survey to understand their entire journey, digital behavior, in this case specifically relating to race weekends. But the same is applicable obviously to other events too, whether we're talking about, you know, another entertainment event, we're talking about seasonality in a particular category, or buyers in making a purchase of a new vehicle and so on. So there's a, you know, that is something that is I say pretty universal. The other scenario which was mentioned there in terms of the conclusion was around understanding, or lack of data outside of one's own kind of website analytics or CRM, and outside one's estate effectively. So filling in those gaps, and that manifests itself outside of customer journeys. That manifests in things like understanding of, you know, tracking of loyalty and disloyalty within a category. A brand may see a customer as very loyal because the high engagement we have with their properties, but actually we see, you know, within our data that they are also active on competitors as well. So there's kind of a whole competitor intelligence angle. And then we've got some really good examples. There's one on our website with Ofgem around segmentation of news media consumption. So again, looking at from an individual across their behaviors across all properties within a category. Maybe other examples are more related to kind of syndicated research, which is a different area of our business, but I think those I've highlighted are ones that are probably most relevant in the context of kind of customer or consumer insights for brands.
Thank you, Luke. And yeah, just to add to that, I mean, we've used this technology in lots of different ways, and whether that's kind of more small scale, qualitative, or real in-depth understanding to kind of combine with kind of more traditional routes, and even down onto kind of quantitative, big, large numbers of kind of users to kind of map actual behaviors over time as well. So there's a lot of different use scenarios, and actually given how the world has changed with COVID, and we've seen a lot of people's behaviors have changed drastically, actually this technology is incredibly powerful to help us understand what people are doing that they just won't be able to tell us otherwise.
Excellent. So actually we have had some questions through, and I think you guys have managed to box most of them off, but I'll just ask this one that I think is outstanding. So are there any restrictions by device, e.g. smart TVs, or app, e.g. can't read certain types of activity within any app?
So I can maybe take this one. So it's not so much restrictions in terms of what we can't see. You know, we've made some active choices in terms of the types of apps and websites that we want to grab more granular data from, and that's generally because we've seen a demand in certain areas. So across the board, we have a level of data across all websites and apps, and then certain apps we've gone more forensic in terms of understanding whether that's the e-commerce behaviors, whether that's media consumption, etc. So it's less of a limitation, it's more of a choice we've made where we see a need to be more granular in the kinds of things that we want to capture.
Excellent. So I think that's most of the questions boxed off. So it just leaves me to say thank you all David, Luke, Chris, for your time today presenting, and thanks to everyone who joined us. I'm sure everyone will agree it was a really insightful case. I know converting, what was a mammoth task, a really international case study into just 20 minutes is quite a feat in itself. So well done, guys. If there's any questions outstanding, feel free to reach out to the guys. You can see their emails on screen at the moment. If you are interested in these webinars, a little tease for the next one, we'll be welcoming back our sister agency, Realise Unlimited, back into the spotlight to talk about using data and analytics to determine lifetime value for the customer base. So there will be some communications coming out about that very soon. But otherwise, thank you again. Thank you again to our presenters, and do enjoy your last night of freedom before we all go back into lockdown. Yes, thank you. Stay safe and see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.